Hello there, thanks for staying with us. Welcome to your station of choice, Africa Independent Television. The program is People, Politics and Power. I am Imoni Amarere. Now, for several weeks running, we have been engaging with the vexed issue of restructuring in response to the growing agitations from across the country. The word restructuring has stuck in the mentality of many Nigerians, and the beat just refuses to fizzle out. That is why we are still beaming our focus on the restructuring debate. How should we go about it, and where do we start? Today on the program, we will deal with the endless journey from the Willing Commission, which was put in place in September 1957 to look into fears expressed by minority ethnic groups that the colonial masters imposed their political structure on Nigeria, and would lead to the domination of the minority groups by the majority ethnic groups in the three regions of Nigeria at that time. We have reached out to the former secretary, Pro-NACO Constitution Drafting Committee, a legal practitioner and general secretary of the Lower Niger Congress, LNC, Tony Nnadi, to interrogate this issue with us. He's very much here with us in the studio, but first, let's take some views from the Northern Elders Conference, which began in Kaduna, northwest Nigeria, on Wednesday. The Northern Leaders Conference was put together to articulate the North's position on restructuring in Nigeria.
Agitations for restructuring remains a challenge of the moment. Majority of the speakers at the conference in Kaduna were emphatic that the North is not afraid of restructuring.
Northern Nigeria is not afraid of restructuring. What we believe in is that we must engage our people, hear their views, aggregate their views, and then respect process and procedure. Simple, and that's what we are doing. And we cannot be stampeded into going into what we don't actually prepared for.
We are all for it.
Ango Abdullahi, a professor and an influential member of the Northern Elders Forum, traced the controversy over restructuring to the power rotation arrangement, which, according to him, is being observed in breach. He said that in spite of the enormous sacrifice and tolerance, the North is a victim of blackmail and conspiracy.
I see all these maneuvers as political blackmail against Northern Nigeria. And this is not something we are not prepared to tolerate anymore.
A former lawmaker, Usman Bugaji, who is the convener of the conference, set the tone for discussions as he stated that the conference is an exercise in internal self-evaluation, although he left no one in doubt that the North is prepared to negotiate with other geopolitical zones.
For in the midst of this debate, there are calls for using the reports of the 2006 and 2014 so-called national conferences. How can we forget that these are conferences designed to achieve predetermined results that exclusively serve the personal ambition of one individual and his cabal?
The strong feminine voice at the conference raised the issue of leadership failure, a submission that drew loud applause from the participants.
The problem is with the leadership. It's not with the structure of Nigeria.
That what is important, side by side with the restructuring debate, is to look at the very negative statistics that the North currently parades, particularly in the area of poverty, education, and healthcare. Of course, Dr. Bugaje has alluded to this by stating the huge number of our youths that are out of school. it is his belief that we all as leaders must concentrate on reversing this very negative and ugly set of statistics.
Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar did not shift his position on his clamor for devolution of power and responsibilities from the government at the center, which he believes is too powerful at the detriment of the federating states. The concern of religious leaders is the desirability of freedom of religion.
We are better united, we are stronger united, we are more prosperous united than being divided.
Whatever restructuring that is going to be made, let it be known that all forms of worship, whether Islamic or Christian worship, must be respected and must be given a place.
The conference ends on Thursday.
Let's also take a quick look at the position of some leaders in the South and in the Middle Belt. Their take is that Nigeria must be restructured on the basis of the recommendations of the 2014 National Conference.
The tragedy of our country is that divisions do not allow us to disaggregate emotions from realities. We've had the Constitutional Conference in 2014, no matter how contrived. Some say they were not elected, some say that they were not equally representative. Whatever it is, it was the people of Nigeria from all the constituent parts of Nigeria, and very knowledgeable people, chaired by a former Chief Justice of Nigeria. They produced a document. That document has been requested by the National Assembly. Nobody has given it to them. 2 years and a few months into this administration, nobody has brought it. Is not even sold for us to buy, to synthesize. What did these people waste our resources and our money and their time and energy to put together for our country?
Several billions of naira.
Precisely. It is all wasted. That's intellectual work. And these people burnt midnight oils. They went into serious negotiations to see what would be acceptable to every part of Nigeria. It is dumped in the dustbin of history. That is unpatriotic in my view. That is a starting point. Because if we had those conclusions, we could bring those conclusions as the basis for debate.
And we are saying the condition you have now that is causing trouble is created by the military in 1966, not before. And we say go back to what brought us together until the military separated us. That's what all the religions, all the members in the South are saying. And we are farming this in the Western region. That the Yorubas, that is where we are.
Structure Nigeria, liberate the productive capacity of every section of Nigeria. Let prosperity return to the lives of Nigerians. That's the way forward. That's what the Yoruba people demand. We do not want to live in a country that is declining perpetually. We want to live in a country that has a chance to progress and to become a great country in the world.
It's inevitable. Because the truth of the matter is that since 1914, there has been only one constitution made by the civilians, and that is the 1963. All the constitutions that came after 1963 were military donations. And people are saying, let us now have a truly people's constitution based on a restructured or a rearranged Nigeria, based on the agreement that we had in 1963 Republican Constitution. And that structuring has become inevitable to be able to dismantle
the Nigeria of our dream. The Nigeria we need is the united, indissoluble, and cohesive Nigeria which guarantees equity, fairness, justice, and prosperity for its citizens. That is our focus on people, politics, and power. It is fresh, insightful, impactful. It's a must-watch. People, politics, and power on AIT. Join us to build bridges of unity.
The northern leaders reached a decision to take the recommendations from the Kaduna Conference to the people at the grassroots for their input. Before engaging with other regions across Nigeria, but the nature and manner of the engagement with other regions remains a critical issue for further deliberation. Now, our discussion today on the program is the endless restructuring journey, starting from the Willink Commission. We are joined in the studio by a man who has been in the forefront of the struggle for restructuring. He is the co-convener of the Movement for New Nigeria, MNN, which was the joint implementation platform for the Pro-NARCO consensus, which basically restates the federal basis of Nigeria. He was a lead counsel in the 2007, I beg your pardon, was a lead counsel in the 2007 suit challenging the legitimacy of the 1999 Constitution on the grounds of fraud. He is Tony Nnadi. You are most welcome to the program.
Thank you, Moni. Good to see you again.
That's such a long time.
On the same subject.
Yes.
I'm sure you recall the day before the 2014 conference began.
Yes.
That we took 2 hours to try to talk to the country on what should have been the business of the conference. Unfortunately, the first decision they took on the floor of that conference was that they will not address that business, you remember? And that's what brought us to where we are today.
And of course, I think that was also essentially because of the inaugural speech that was delivered by then President Goodluck Jonathan when he said Nigeria's unity was non-negotiable. That seemed to have set a template for whatever took place at that conference.
No, there are mix-ups here. His inaugural speech I still have, even in the car out here. I was directly involved in what led to the convening of that conference, because we had to engage him to such an extent that he was opposed to any conference at all, until we assured him that we will not let him be. That if we do not address the matter at that time, we will lack a moral justification to raise it any higher than we're raising with him, with anybody that comes thereafter. It was a big fight, but somehow, the statesman in him took over at the point he convened the conference. His speech simply, if we were to summarize that speech in terms of the mandate, he said that the meeting was being convened to examine the reason why the cohesion that should have held the country together had not been in place, and that it was, the language of it was one in which you could see that there was no inhibition on what could be addressed by the conference. It was the conference itself that took that decision. You remember, it was the first resolution that they took. If the president said they should not go that way, it would have been, they wouldn't have needed to debate it. They debated it, and the conservative north and the renegade wing of the southwest at the time, just with their eyes on election and nothing else, decided to shut out the business of that conference so that they could proceed to election. And that was what led to that resolution not to address the being and the terms of the Union of Nigeria. Everything they did in the conference was a waste of everybody's time.
So do you think that the 2014 conference would have achieved better objectives and goals if everything was put on the table for deliberation?
If they had listened,
including the unity of Nigeria,
the union itself.
Yes.
Yes, very much so. I'm sure you witnessed to the kind of effort we put into trying to enlighten those who do not know, because there are many who do not know amongst those who had to go to deal with the matter. I've been dealing with them for many, many years. Many do not understand the meaning of a federation. A federation is simply a union of constitutions. Nigeria became one country as a federation. If it was not going to be a federation, it would not have been one country. You remember that it came to where the motion for independence was moved in 1953, and the northern delegation at the time to the northern representative blocked it because they were not ready. And it was like the union would not be except certain conditions were met. And there were 8 conditions listed by the leader of the North at the time, Ahmadu Bello. Those 8 conditions became the definition for the kind of federal structure that was adopted by Nigeria in 1954 as the basis of the union becoming one. And it is those same 8 points of insistence that define the campaign, the demand for restructuring today. We went into it because it was just a matter of the degree of autonomy that the regions will accept to lump them, because these were sovereign units at the time. You remember the Constitution of Western Region came into being in 1956. The one of the East followed. Then 2 years after, the one of the North came. These constitutions were like Germany and France and Portugal that will go into a European Union. And it was the unionization. First was the distillation of the constitutions that will federate. That's what we mean by union of constitutions. They are coming with their sovereignty and their people into a larger union for economy of scale, nothing more. And in going into that, at any point in time, you went away from, you tampered with that foundational basis of being in one union. You don't want that federation anymore. And that was what happened to Nigeria in 1966, when by the accident of the coup of January, those constitutions, the military administration that emerged had to do something to hold the place together from going up in flames. But
and brought us the unitary system of governance.
No. What Ironsi did in January 1960, because there's a lot of revisioning going on, what he did was it was only the administrations of the regions that were replaced by military administrators who then constituted the Supreme Military Council just to restore some kind of order. He did not tamper with the structure of Nigeria. It was on May 27, 1967, that the structure of Nigeria was tampered with for the first time by Yakubu Gowon, when he created 12 states.
But once Ironsi took over and suspended the existing constitution and appointed military administrators in the regions, it was a done deal that the constitutions of the regions themselves were also suspended.
Ironsi did not fall from the sky. Ironsi was a product. The young people who, the Nzogwa and co that went to do the coup, didn't get to power. Ironsi himself was listed to be one of the victims of the coup, but somehow he had survived, and he was the head of the army, and it fell on him to restore order to the country as the one who could do so. And I mean, it became the business of the military to do so. In getting into that task, you remember that there was the first fall that Nigeria had from its federalism was on the 29th of May in 1962. Remember that the federal government of the time had suspended, abrogated the constitution of the Western region in matters, in circumstances that were forbidden by the constitution of the time. The constitution of the time did not permit the federal government to do such a drastic thing in a region, except for all the regions were in agreement. It was done in pursuit of politics and who will be in power. From that point on, the elections, independence elections that led to Awolowo and co getting into the quarrel after going to court, they said they wanted to overthrow. Awolowo was sent to prison. In trying to manage the situation, they suspended the constitution of Western region. Then, without the appointed sole administrator, people were still resisting that. Then the elections of 1964 came, just like they are trying to drive to 2019 election now, with a burning constitution, with a constitution that had been rejected across board, but for a small stretch of the country in the uppermost part. The rest of the country had repudiated that constitution as basis of Nigeria. That was what the Yoruba went to do in Ibadan on 7th of September in a solemn assembly. I just came back from Washington. The rest of the world knows that Nigeria, the Federation of Nigeria has collapsed. There's a country, Nigeria, but there's no Federation of Nigeria as of today. If large chunks and sections coming to almost 3/4 of the country could be going to every part to say that this basic title deed is no longer the basis of our union, because our signatures were forged and put on top of a document we did not make. I'm a lawyer of 26 years. I do not know any other definition of a forgery than somebody doing something and alleging that it was done by another. Say, we the people. And it may look like semantics to some, but with that reality that we did not make that document as claimed in that preamble, that document is like the check you did not sign, getting to a bank to be cashed, and you coming in for another transaction, and the bank finding out that you didn't sign the check. That is the kind of instrument Nigeria has in its hands for selling 3 million barrels of crude oil belonging to people who are protesting the forgery of their signature. That's what the whole resource control business and the agitation that it has spawned, that's what it represents. The people are saying, at what point did we, commit our lands and our people into this process? Asari was before a court, being arraigned for treason, and I was involved in that case. I'm counsel on record in that suit. And that was what we had to tell the court, that as a judge, he was plaintiff himself and was Rika at the time. We had to put them as plaintiffs in that suit against the legitimacy of the Constitution for Nigeria to come to show them the instrument, because the Supreme Court, on the 5th of June, Supreme Court of Nigeria did deny Asari bail on account of that preamble to that Constitution. Supreme Court actually said in that judgment that you, Asari, had gone outside what we, the people, they quoted that full preamble as basis of the treason that had to be sustained against the one who had gone with his people outside that preamble that we, the people, agree. And it's just a matter of falsehood and forgery. You cannot anchor any benefit on a forgery. The moment a forgery is discovered, it collapses.
Okay, we will come back to the Constitution itself much later. But let's go back to 1957.
Yes.
When the minorities, various minority groups in Nigeria expressed fears about possible marginalization by the majority groups, which of course led to the setting up of the Wheeling Commission by the colonial masters at that time. Now, fast forward to 60 years after.
We are back in the discussion.
We are back in the discussion, but this time it's not just the minorities
that
are expressing fears, that are complaining. Even the majority groups are complaining.
The problems we must resolve now is like something that required a minor surgery at the initial time. Then you ignore it, say, well, it will go away. Then it began to require a major surgery. You still did not carry it out, saying, look, we can't do this surgery. This person will suffer pain or some kind of inconvenience. It comes to where even a major surgery will not solve the problem. There are vertical aspects of this problem. There are horizontal aspects. There's also the diagonal that was never seen. The vertical is one in which there's the apex, the middle, and if you go back to Ahmadu Bello's 1960 battle script, in the week of independence, when the rest of the people were celebrating what they thought had become freedom from colonial rule, Ahmadu Bello, was celebrating something else with his lieutenants in northern Nigeria. And he says to them that the new nation called Nigeria should be an estate of our great-grandfather Uthman Dan Fodio. That we must not allow a change of power. We use the minorities of the middle belt as willing tools and the South as a conquered territory. Never allow them rule over us, never allow them have control over their future. This one paragraph has defined all of everybody, because he said we must ruthlessly prevent a change of power in the second line. That has defined everything that had happened to everybody and putting us in that stratified state where there are owners of the enterprise, there are willing tools, the middle belt, the Danjumas and the Gowans of this world who had to go to beat down the rest of the Southern slaves. And the rest of the South are slaves according to that script. And when you look at all of how we arrived at where we have come, from 4 regions, 3 regions that are federated, to 36 states now, you begin to count all of those who created the structures that have now turned unworkable. Between Gowon, Murtala Mohammed, Ibrahim Bangida, Sani Abacha. Where were the officers from the rest of the country?
That's the question I needed to ask. Where were the politicians from the rest of the country?
Soldiers were in charge.
At the time,
soldiers were in charge.
Ahmadu Bello allegedly made these statements?
Well, it's not a matter of allegedly. It's, I've seen the records myself because we had to get into the archives to find out what happened when we were not there, because we now have to deal with them. If you don't know how it came, you may not be able to solve it. The quotation I made was reported in a Parrot newspaper of 12th October 1960. Going by the technology of the time, you could be sure that it happened around the celebrations for October 1st. Now, back to what led to that, yes, in which the other people could not do anything.
Exactly.
The documents of amalgamation that the Lower Niger Congress has in its possession, some of which predated Nigeria from all the treaties that they signed, at the time they were dealing with the colony of Lagos, oil rivers, that they aggregated and consolidated in 1914 into one title document that became the Amalgamated Union. You could see that there was a deliberate design to hand over power to those who they chose to, who they already determined. And these are not everything done from that point of the order in council of 1913 to 1922 to 1946. Everything was done to retain the original intention of the British to have this place under their control by proxy of the people they empowered, and they gerrymandered all of what geography and history will have prescribed for the situation. Therefore, there was no doubt that something was done to hold the bar up against one part and hold it down against the other. But by the time it got to discussing the kind of union they could go into, of course, I already talked about the 1953 motion that was blocked, and what happened in 1954 to become the definition of the basis of Nigeria. Anybody who wants to solve this problem today must bear in mind that we're talking about vertical, horizontal. The vertical is that master, middle, the enforcers, and the slave. The horizontal is one in which you are talking about territory now. As you come from the 12, predominantly Muslim states of the north, Sokoto going to Maiduguri, you see a civilization that is rooted in feudalism, that had Sharia at the core. I mean, they preferred Sharia. Nigeria is the one imposing democracy on them. If they were to demand their rights for self-determination, it is what Boko Haram is saying that they will be saying, because Nigeria had not gone to find out from them whether this democracy is what they prefer, or the Sharia that is mutually exclusive with democracy and constitutionalism. So you are offending them in that regard. You come further down, the middle belt, and that brings us to the Willings Commission, because that's some of the things that are now having to be resolved. The Willings Commission did not deal with only the Niger Delta, like many people think. The Willings Commission, in dealing with the minorities, looked at the middle belt. You remember Joseph Tucker and all the commotions that became the riot, the thief riots of the time, and even before then. The middle belt, who are predominantly Christians, refused to be part of that northern region going into independence. They wanted a middle belt region because of their change. What Willings Commission did, which has been tampered with now, and which is going to bring its own consequences, was they said it was Sharia that the middle belt was rejecting in refusing to go with the rest of the north. A compromise was reached to say that there's something they call a penal code that was something you could use to resolve the issue, to still allow one region have Muslims in one part and Christians in the other, because it didn't go to criminalize everything that the substantive laws of crime of the country did not criminalize. Now they had to put the Sharia aside as basis. Sharia was removed from the table as basis of the middle belt being part of the northern region. The moment in year 2000, those 12 contiguous states that ran from Sokoto to Maiduguri simultaneously passed Sharia. They had repudiated the basis of being in a federation with that part that had to. And if you do not go to resolve that, it's a matter of life and death, whether anybody admits it or not. We have seen that there seems to be an obligation of faith to kill the infidel. The adherents of one faith owe it a duty to their faith to kill the non-adherent. That's Sharia.
Will it be correct to assert that from Sokoto, which is in the northwest, to Maiduguri, which
don't
is in
even
the
use any of the terminologies Nigeria brought subsequently.
No. I mean, those are subsequent terminologies. But I mean, it simplifies what we're trying to say. Across from Sokoto to Maiduguri, that these are homogeneous peoples.
No, not
homogeneous religion, because there are also minorities.
Very much so. Very much so.
In these areas,
you can't solve any problem.
Who probably do not also have a homogeneous religion or a homogeneous culture or even language.
Are there no Christians in Saudi Arabia? Are there no Muslims in Israel? You come to where you solve it. If you can't solve 100% of any problem. If from solving even 10-20% like Nigeria is battling, you're able to solve 70, you're able to solve 90%. It gets better if it's 95, because that's the kind of figures you begin to see when you go that far. Now, the Williams, as it relates to the restructuring being talked about now, the Williams Commission talked about what to do with Niger. Forget about Oloibiri of Nnadi. The British have sold our oil for about 50 years before declaring Oloibiri. You've been to Owerri before. There's a place called Shell Camp in Owerri. Yes. Shell was headquartered in that place for 42 years before going to Port Harcourt in 1960 in the period of independence. It was Emma Okpara that bought the property from them. And what was Shell doing in that massive place for that length of time? If the story will have to begin with Oloibiri, like all the other lies, including we, the people making a constitution we never discussed, these guys knew what they were doing, and they knew that those who owned that asset will wake up to ask questions. They wanted something that will settle that question up front by asking that things be done for them, which would then be used to pacify them when they begin to make trouble. The people they handed over to in 1960 did not see it that way. Nothing was done. When did Isaac Borough turn up? Less than 6 years from that time, saying they no longer belong. Niger Delta People's Volunteer Force and the 12-day independence they declared. So where we are is that the problem is so very simple. If we take one thing away from this session, let it be a clear understanding in the minds of all who are listening, the meaning of restructuring. Because if we don't get that meaning and go to face it with some degree of honesty, it will cost the union its life.
So for you, what is the meaning of restructuring? Because I asked that question like you have rightly said.
Yes.
There are different meanings and different perspectives, different interpretations of restructuring.
What it simply means is a demand by a majority. If you go to referendum now, you will find no less than 80%. A demand by a majority to return to what we agreed upon at the point of becoming one country, a federation. We ceased to be a federation in 1966, and it got formalized, it got executed in a manner that seemed irreversible from May 1967, and it had gotten worse. It was worsened by every subsequent creation of states. We are now at 36.
Is it realistic to actually go back to 1963?
No. What is in principle? What we did in Pronaco, and I didn't just saunter into Pronaco. It was because we had dug through the archives, and Ohoro was there to tell us what we didn't know. The balance came from records that surprised even himself. There were documents I showed Ohoro of things that were classified at the time they were entering into what became Nigeria. And he said that if they had 1/4 of those documents, that there would have been no basis of settling into being one union, because there's no other way to solve than to reconstruct the union from that point of deceit occasioned by those who put us together. Now, how does that play? The restructuring is like a reconstruction. Let us go back to what we agreed upon, in which the constitutions that will federate, it's just a matter of the autonomy, the degree of autonomy that can take care of the cultural and socio-political differences that predate Nigeria. If what Nigeria has done is to sweep all of those underground and hoping that they can manage. However, nobody's going to be able to manage it. We can see on all the indices that it's not being managed. There's no managing of it except we go to address it. And in practical terms, because if we say let's go back to 1960 or 1963 Constitution, it doesn't automatically remove all the states that have been created from the surface of the earth. No, it only means that the exclusive list, two things, and Bola had defined it for us, that the business we have to do to put Nigeria back on its legs is to first decide whether we want to continue in the union, and that question must go to those who will be federating, because he was conversant with the meaning of a federation. Some of the professors and senior advocates we have these days and political philosophers do not even understand that meaning of federation anymore as a union of constitutions. You cannot say you have a federation with one constitution. And I see my seniors in the profession, Professor Benwabweze particularly, talking about how he crafted a draft in 1976 that became 1977 Constituent Assembly, and then became 1979 Constitution, which was carried forward in 1999, one constitution for a federation. It's an anomaly, it's unsustainable. Those whose constitutions have been suspended, all those were the owners, the owners of the union, that is the sovereignties that were suppressed in all that time of suspending, from that time of suspending the 5 constitutions that defined the Union of Nigeria, the Federation of Nigeria, are now agitating to have their sovereignty back and negotiate what they want to give up as a part of being in a union with the rest of the people. Let us take it from the perspective of what Yoruba went to do in Ibadan on the 7th of September. You remember that before then there was a Yoruba National Assembly that had declared 3 things. June 24th, that they reject the 1999 Constitution as basis of Nigeria, that they reject any further national elections in the territory, in the Yoruba territory, on the basis of that Constitution, because it can only renew their enslavement in Nigeria. But more importantly, that even before they become available for discussing restructuring with the rest of Nigeria, they must get a mandate from the Yoruba populace recommitting to the union by referendum, internal regional referendum. How that plays out, you understand?
Yes.
It is because they want to reestablish that constitution, that kind of constitution that Awolowo had, by which he performed the miracles he performed. That kind of constitution that Obara had, by which he performed the miracles performed in Eastern Nigeria. That kind of constitution that Ahmadu Bello had. They didn't quite fail. As others were building University of Ibadan and UNN, Ahmadu Bello was able to put up Ahmadu Bello University. And all kinds of things that, every region was trying to compete with the other. If we go back to that as the working document for today, the first urgent thing that Nigeria must do, if anybody is still willing to have a federation, is what South Africa did in 1990 under Frederick de Klerk, to announce that this constitution has been rejected across board. We are not anarchists. In the suit we filed in 2007, we had asked the court to order the defendants, that's the government, the president, and all of that, to within a period of 18 months, remain in office. Or let all those who are already elected, our quarrel is not with the president or the governor, let them, including senators, let them all remain in office. Let us go to that surgery that Nigeria could still undergo today. Because if you don't...
Would that be the major surgery?
The major surgery in that announcement, in that acknowledgement that the people, the owners of these sovereignties that have been suppressed did not make this constitution, the document is put aside. They have been mixed up so much. We've been here for 100 years.
Well, yes, if that document is put aside,
if it's put aside,
what would then be the basis of the continued existence of the union?
No, putting aside is to acknowledge that it has to be changed. That was exactly what South Africa did with apartheid constitution. They had a parliament. They didn't go amending apartheid because it was based on a wrong philosophy of master and servant. There's no single difference between what we are complaining about now and what South African blacks were complaining about at the time, because the only thing was that theirs, it was the Boers and then the black owners. Here we have the Fulani and the rest of the people. aided by their British friends, to impose everything on the rest of us. What's the solution? To accept that there can be no permanent master and servant, and therefore put aside the instruments by which all that master-servant relationship is being maintained, and then there's still sufficient goodwill for people to, come to work out how we restore what we originally agreed upon. And if the working document becomes the 1960 or 1963 constitution, the Yoruba will take the their own regional constitution. They already know the relationship between the Egba, the Jesha, the Ijebu, you understand, among themselves. Back home, you can see they've done their integration. They will work out something that will accommodate all of what has been created in terms of states among themselves. And they will come with a charter.
Because
it will not take more than 6 months to do.
Yeah, because
the eastern side, the lower Niger,
the structure that existed in 1963
yes,
is not the same structure that is in place today.
No, that's
so
what I'm saying.
How will, for instance, the Yorubas take the 1963 constitution and adapt it to today's realities?
The states have been created. There were sentiments that led to the creation of those states. There are even more demands in Ijebu state and all of that. But if Nigeria were to make that announcement today as the first step to saving its union, what we are saying that it must happen in 2 stages. Going back to Bola Ige, let us first agree we'll be in a union, and then if the answer is yes, go to the terms of that union. That is the only logic that can bring us back to being a federation. If anybody is thinking that they will call one meeting and then everybody will gather in Abuja and will begin to argue amongst ourselves who gives and who takes in a situation of more than 300 and something languages and cultures, is going to end like all the other conferences before it. And
including the 2014 conference.
That one collapsed before it started. You remember I was part of how it came about, but I refused to come when I saw the terms of reference, that the outcome will be will be taken to National Assembly. The National Assembly is like the management of a company. The National Assembly institution is the memo and articles of a company is in the same position as the constitution to a country. The National Assembly is like the management of a company that is now, appropriating the right of changing the content of the memo and article, of which the owners are not to be called into the business. If you are the owner of a business and you come there one day and your staff, because they are 50 in number, had gathered in one side to change the memo and articles of that company, removing you and other shareholders, that's what happened to us in 1960. That's what the National Assembly is trying to maintain now, that our sovereignty is now with them to come and decide that their mandate does not include constitution making. Their mandate in the National Assembly does not include constitution making. If they are pointing at the sections that authorize them to amend, I will ask who made that constitution. It goes back to we not being a part of all of how it came. They are a product of the fraud. They must accept at this time that we should leave that fraud aside and go and decide how we live together. We've been mixed up for 100 years. I have family in the north. I have family, I grew up practically in the western part. All my childhood friends are from the western part. I'm from the east. And if anybody could look back at what we have done in the last 20 years to try to find some common ground in this, and every time we come to solving it, somebody will say it's not negotiable. And then the next thing, armored vehicles will roll out, and then you begin to run helter-skelter and hoping that the whole thing will go away. Where the thing is now, there's something that has changed on the global stage. It's called the right to self-determination. And I'm addressing this matter of restructuring from the perspective of those who are talking about self-determination, including the OPC elements and the ones doing Biafra in the eastern side, and all the other ones who are saying they no longer agree with what Nigeria is saying, including what Yoruba did in Ibadan the other day. We are saying that it is their right. If you want to understand what went wrong and what needs to be rectified, Section 14 of this Constitution of Nigeria, 1999, says that sovereignty, 14, subsection 2A, says that sovereignty belongs to the people of Nigeria, from whom government through this constitution derives all its powers and authority. And you go to the preamble that claims that We the people, that's we the Ijaw, we the Ogoni, we the Fulani, we the Igbo, having examined everything, agree to live in unity as one country and hereby make, there are two businesses that we the people have solemnly agreed is one business. It's like the memo of a company that creates the company. Then do hereby make and give us ourselves the following constitution. It's like the articles. You know, the memo creates the company. Morere and Johnson and Maria had to make put together their assets to form a company. So the memo creates the company. The articles now begin to define what will happen among the stakeholders. They are two different documents, just like they have to go together.
All right. So your advocacy at this point in time,
yes,
is that we adopt the South African model post-apartheid.
In terms of procedure. In terms of procedure and transitioning. That transitioning, we're not anarchists. We are saying that we are prepared to accept even what we filed in court. We didn't say they should throw the constitution so that the country can go into Somalia. No. We said, let those in government house remain on a transitional basis. We've tolerated the document for close to 20 years. We can tolerate it another 6 months or 1 year, if that is what it will take to work out this. Everybody knows the contents of what we want in place of what we don't want. A lot of work has gone into making out those contents to the very last detail. And if there's anybody who is in a position to know, like you said, I was the secretary of the committee that crafted, what did we do in Pronaco? It was the Aburi consensus that we had to bring back to the owners of Nigeria, not the 4 governors that went to Aburi. We brought the basic thing that, because in Aburi was a demand to return to the original arrangement. And then from that point, it has been demand for restructuring after 50 years if that meeting is not holding in earnest to rework the basis of the union. Those who are blocking it are only saying they don't want any federation. And I don't think that they are representing the people that they claim to represent.
All right, we must leave it at that. We've been talking with Tony Nnadi. Tony Nnadi is a legal practitioner. He was lead counsel in the 2007 suit challenging the legitimacy of the 1999 Constitution on the grounds that it is a fraud and that we, the people of Nigeria, did not make that Constitution. And of course, you have heard him express those same views here. He is the co-convener of the movement for New Nigeria, which was the joint implementation platform for Pronaco. Tony Nnadi, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Welcome.
Thank you.
And that's our program today. Join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. My name is Imonia Marere. To have yourself a wonderful day for the rest of the day. Bye for now.